Hello everyone, TLSG here, back again with another daily Marvel Snap video. Today we have the featured location, Vibranium Mines. And in the Vibranium Mines, whenever you play a card here, similar to the Lechugia, you're going to shuffle 3 Vibranium into your deck. Only the big difference is that Vibranium isn't useless. Vibranium is a 1-cost 4-power card that has the ongoing ability, this cannot be destroyed. So that should tell you kind of the direction that this video is going to go. But as with all featured locations, since it only appears in 40% of games, you want a deck list that can perform well on its own because you're not going to see that location every single game. And so today I'm going to be covering the top 5 decks that I recommend trying out while this location is featured. And so we'll make this one short and sweet, starting out Spectrum Ongoing. Okay, that was a little bit excessive, but still, it is very heavily driven towards Spectrum Ongoing. Because the Vibranium that you put into your deck does have the ongoing tag, you're going to be able to buff it up to 6 power as a 1-cost card. And so to get any kind of usage out of the location, if you're looking for upside directly from playing in that location, then Spectrum is going to be your go-to. But if you're looking to counter any of these, and specifically my last one is meant to be a counter to these Spectrum decks, because I fully anticipate that there is going to be a flood of them today. But if you're really wanting to counter the Spectrum Ongoing decks that you're seeing all over the place, I would say run Enchantress in whatever deck you're navigating. And so starting off with pool 1, we have a Spectrum Ongoing build. Surprise, surprise. Now this one does use Angela and Nightcrawler as non-ongoing cards, because in pool 1, we don't have as much access to ongoing cards as we do in pool 2 and pool 3. And Angela plus Nightcrawler is just a fantastic tempo drop to be able to continue to push power and push stats onto the board. Now the rest of the deck runs pretty similar to any other Spectrum Ongoing. You stack several ongoing cards into one location. You kind of spread out your power just enough to be able to decide where you want to drop your turn 5 and turn 6 play, ideally being either an Iron Man or a Claw and a Spectrum on turn 6 to buff up all of the rest of your board. Now, one thing to note with Vibranium Mines is that if you don't have Spectrum, I would say don't play in the location. Only play and invest resources into the location once you have all of your key resources, because it's going to do the same thing as the Lechugia in that it decreases the consistency that you're going to draw into your other resources because you're adding cards into your deck into the pool that you can draw from. Now next up we have the pool 2 Spectrum Ongoing deck list, and the biggest changes with this one are that we have the resource of Ebony Maw and we have the resource of Warpath. Typically we only want to drop Ebony Maw in a location where we are about to cap it out. So if we got the upside of drawing into our Ant-Man, our Armor, our Colossus, and our Ebony Maw, we can play all of those by turn 3 to fill up the lane, have a really big power push, and then we can still invest our higher cost resources into one lane in our Warpath, Iron Man, and Spectrum to find the win condition there as well. But typically we don't want to drop Ebony Maw if it's going to be the only resource or one of the only 2, because it gives the opponent too much information about what we're going to be playing onto the board. But otherwise, this runs very similar to any other Spectrum Ongoing deck list. Let's jump over into deck number 3. Now next up we have a couple of very variety choices. The first one is a Spectrum Ongoing Destroyer list, similar to the other ones. That is one of the biggest upsides. Now you can run any deck that runs a Scarlet Witch and you're going to be just fine. Maybe if Spectrum Ongoing is not necessarily your flavor, or you don't really like that archetype, check out some of my other lists. I did run a couple recently that use a Scarlet Witch, and so those will do just fine for you. Or skip to the last deck, that is going to be a counter deck. But as far as this one, it is a very standard Spectrum Ongoing Destroyer list, which gives you the flexibility of either dropping Spectrum or Destroyer on your final turn play. Now, where this one gets kind of spicy is that with Quinjet, we're going to be able to reduce the cost of any card that didn't start in our deck by 1. And so that means that all of the Vibranium are going to be free. They're going to be able to be played onto the board after our Destroyer, right before our Spectrum on turn 6. We just have a lot more flexibility in being able to decide where we want to push some power onto the board. But otherwise, this one runs very similarly to any other Spectrum Ongoing deck list. You stack some of your ongoing cards, you try to lock down the lane with Professor X, then you can either buff it up with Spectrum, or you're free to drop your Destroyer into one of the other lanes as a big last turn power push. The only issue with this deck is that it's very easy to tell what your opponent can potentially do. So you're not going to see big late game power swings as much because it is such a common deck nowadays that everyone can calculate +2 to all of your ongoing cards or +16 in a lane, and they can play around that potential. And then next up we have another variation of a Spectrum ongoing. And as a disclaimer, this one is theory crafted. I don't know if this will work, but the idea is that it is a very standard Spectrum ongoing deck list. But with Quinjet, if you have Quinjet on the board and you play into the Vibranium Mine location, you're shuffling 1-cost Vibranium into your deck. If Quinjet is on the board, Quinjet's ability doesn't specify that it only reduces the cost of cards in your hand by 1. It just says that cards that didn't start in your deck cost 1 less. So technically, the Vibranium could be a 0-cost card in your deck, allowing Jane Foster to pull all of those Vibranium from your deck to give you a very, very big last turn play. You could throw all of those onto the board either after a Destroyer or before a Spectrum, and just it gives you a lot of flexibility if you get the high roll of these 2 cards. Now I tried to test this out with a rock location, so I tried to run both Quinjet and Jane Foster and look for matchups that either gave me the Lechugia into a Subterranea, or the opponent even used a Korg. And I played for 3 hours and lost about 60 cubes trying to find one of these locations, and I didn't see a single one. Now, as soon as I switched off and I started running a discard deck again, I saw Subterranea as the very first location afterwards. At that point, I took a break for the day, but in theory, this should work because Quinjet doesn't specify that it's only cards in your hand. It says cards that didn't start in your deck, and the Vibranium definitely didn't start in your deck. And so if Jane Foster can pull those out, that's going to give you a pretty big element of surprise that I'm really excited to test out today. And then as promised, we can't go all Spectrum ongoing decks. So what other decks can do well today? Really anything that runs Scarlet Witch, or if you run an Enchantress and you use Enchantress before the anticipated Spectrum comes down, you're going to be able to take away the upside that the opponent has from their ongoing cards. If you have initiative going into that last turn, then Spectrum won't be able to buff up those cards, and you can sneak away games that you wouldn't have been able to otherwise. Now with this list, the idea is that we are pushing as much power onto the board as possible. The most of this list didn't come from me. This was another deck that was mostly crafted by KM Best, who's becoming really good at kind of refining some in-game decks that are just very, very consistent. But with this one, I added an Enchantress to kind of counteract the opponent's play in Vibranium Mine, anticipating that we're going to see a lot of ongoing decks and a lot of ongoing cards today. Now, if you have both Enchantress and Sarah in your hand, then you can hold Enchantress until that final turn. Otherwise, you might want to drop Enchantress on 5, that way you can flood the rest of the board and the rest of your power and stats onto the board on 6, or you force the opponent into knowing that they don't have a win condition, and then they end up retreating. Because if you can hit their armor with an Enchantress as they're dropping a Destroyer, they're going to potentially wipe out their entire board. Or if you hit the armor with the Enchantress, then all of a sudden they can't get +2 to all of those cards, and their power push becomes much less impactful. So between all of the lists, I think this is probably going to be the best performer today, because I anticipate seeing a lot of Spectrum ongoing, a lot of Spectrum Destroyer decks. I am excited to try out the Jane Foster interaction because I think that will be pretty cool long-term for kind of some different build-around potential with Quinjet, Sarah, some other cost reductions along with Jane Foster. But I think this one, I think the counter deck is going to be our best performer for today. But those are my top 5 deck recommendations to try out today. Let me know what you're running. Did you try one of these decks specifically? Did you tweak it? Did you see another combo that just kind of outshadows anything that I thought of before the location went into effect? If you did, leave it in the comment section down below. I love seeing it. I love kind of seeing the different angles that you guys take. But I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. As always, this has been TLSG. Later, guys.